In Milbrook, Nebraska, population 847 or 846 if you don't count Old Man Jenkins, who's been in a coma since last year's Corn Festival incident, nothing much ever happened. The most exciting event of the week was usually when someone's cow wandered onto Main Street, or when the local teens tried to tip said cow and discovered that YouTube tutorials weren't quite as instructive as they'd hoped. But the real action, the kind that would make Las Vegas weep with envy, happened every Friday night at 85-year-old Hazel Morrison's weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of town. That's where the most cutthroat poker games this side of the Mississippi took place, complete with homemade chocolate chip cookies that could make a grown man cry and lemonade strong enough to strip paint. Hazel, with her silver hair always perfectly set in rollers and wearing her lucky cardigan, the blue one with only 3 moth holes, had been hosting these games since her Harold passed away 15 years ago. She'd decided that moping around wasn't her style and that taking her neighbor's money was a much better use of her time. Tonight was no different. Well, except for the ominous purple clouds swirling overhead, the strange metallic humming that made all the dogs in town howl in 3-part harmony, and the fact that every electronic device in Milbrook was displaying what appeared to be an intergalactic declaration of war in 7 different languages, none of which anyone in town spoke, unless you counted Mrs. Peterson's 2 years of high school Spanish. "Drat," Hazel muttered, adjusting her bifocals as she peered out her kitchen window. "Those lights up there are going to make it harder for people to find parking." She turned back to her counter, where she was arranging cookies on her best serving plate, the one with only 2 chips in it. Though I suppose the bright side is that Benjamin won't be able to use the glare from the streetlight as an excuse for misreading his cards again. The house shook as something massive passed overhead, rattling her prized collection of commemorative spoons from various Nebraska gift shops. Hazel simply steadied her cookie plate and added more ice to the lemonade pitcher. The phone rang, the landline, because Hazel still insisted that cell phones were just a passing fad. "Morrison residence," she answered, already knowing it would be her neighbor Ethel, probably calling to cancel. "Hazel, are you watching the news? There are alien spaceships. They're saying it's the end of the world. You need to—" "Now, Ethel," Hazel interrupted, using the same tone she'd once used on her 3rd-grade students before retirement. "I've been hosting poker night for 15 years, and I didn't cancel when that tornado came through in 12 or during the great blizzard of 18, and I'm certainly not canceling because of a few uninvited guests from outer space. The cookies are already made." "But Hazel—" "Besides," she continued, watching through her window as a massive ship the size of 3 football fields settled into the Hendersons' cornfield, which, honestly, was probably for the best, since Tom Henderson hadn't been taking proper care of it anyway. "I've got extra chairs in the basement if they want to join. You know my policy. Everyone's welcome, as long as they bring something for the snack table." As Hazel hung up the phone, the sky outside her window turned an interesting shade of chartreuse, and what appeared to be a beam of light started systematically disintegrating the town's only traffic light. She checked her watch, 6:45 p.m., just enough time to put out the good napkins before everyone arrived, or before whatever was emerging from that ship with too many tentacles and far too few manners made its way to her front door. "Well," she said to her cat, Mr. Whiskers, who was somehow still sleeping on his favorite cushion despite the apocalyptic light show outside, "at least this will give us something more interesting to talk about than Mildred's hip replacement." The Hendersons' cornfield had seen better days. Between Tom's questionable farming practices and his son's attempts to make crop circles last summer, which looked more like crop squiggles, it wasn't exactly prime agricultural real estate. But now, with a massive spaceship crushing what remained of the corn and leaving a crater deep enough to make an insurance adjuster weep, property values were about to take an even steeper dive. Downtown Milbrook had erupted into what passed for chaos in a town where the most exciting thing last month was when someone put dish soap in the town square fountain. People ran around in circles, occasionally bumping into each other and apologizing profusely. The volunteer fire department had rolled out their one truck, only to discover that alien invasion response protocols weren't covered in their training manual. Meanwhile, Hazel was putting the finishing touches on her famous 7-layer dip. "The trick," she announced to her still sleeping cat, "is to make sure the guacamole layer is thick enough, Nothing ruins poker night like subpar snacks. A sonic boom rattled her windows, but she'd raised 3 boys and taught elementary school for 30 years. It would take more than that to make her spill the sour cream. Outside, metallic pods began descending from the mothership, each landing with a precise thud that made the local seismologist, who was really just Old Man Jenkins' grandson with a rock collection, very excited. The pods opened with Hollywood-worthy fog effects, revealing tall, muscular figures in armor that looked like someone had crossed a night with a disco ball. The leader of these warriors, Supreme Commander Zixanax of the Galactic Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet, stepped forth expecting the usual reaction. Screaming, panic, perhaps some groveling. Instead, he got Mrs. Peterson's poodle relieving itself on one of his soldiers' boots. "Humans of Earth," his voice boomed through advanced audio technology that still somehow couldn't eliminate feedback. "We have come to, is that cinnamon I smell?" Indeed, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of Hazel's freshly baked snickerdoodles across the field. The mighty warrior's antennae twitched appreciatively. "Your planet is now under the control of the, are those cookies?" "Oh good, you can smell them from out there," Hazel called from her porch where she'd appeared with a plate of still warm cookies. "I wasn't sure if aliens had noses, or if you can eat human food. You can eat human food, can't you? It would be terribly rude to serve something you're allergic to." The assembled warriors of the galaxy's most feared conquest fleet looked at each other in confusion. This wasn't in the invasion manual. "Resistance-ism futile," Commander Zixanax tried again, though his heart wasn't quite in it anymore. Those cookies did smell amazing. "Well, of course it is, dear," Hazel agreed cheerfully. "That's why I'm inviting you to poker night instead. Though you'll need to park some of those pods somewhere else. Mrs. Henderson across the street gets testy when people block her view of the bird feeder." The warriors bristled, their armor clanking impressively. "We are the Zixanax, conquerors of 1,000 worlds. We do not simply join poker nights." "Do conquerors of 1,000 worlds know how to play Texas Hold'em?" Hazel asked, adjusting her glasses. "Because if not, I'd be happy to teach you, though we usually start with 5-card draw for beginners." Commander Zixanax opened his mouth to deliver another thundering proclamation, but was interrupted by one of his lieutenants tugging at his cape. "Sir," the lieutenant whispered, "Central Command did say we should study Earth customs before implementing full subjugation protocols." "Yes, and we are 12 light-years ahead of schedule." "True, however. And," the lieutenant added hopefully, "those cookies do smell really good." The commander looked from his troops to the little old lady on the porch, who was now setting up a TV tray with napkins and small plates, because, invasion or not, she wasn't about to let anyone eat over her good tablecloth. "We accept your invitation," he announced, trying to maintain some dignity, "but know that this does not mean we have abandoned our conquest." "Of course not, dear," Hazel said soothingly. "Now, do any of you have food allergies? And how do you feel about jalapenos in the cheese dip?" As the warriors of the Zixanax filed into Hazel's living room, carefully trying not to scratch her hardwood floors with their battle armor, more than one neighbor peering through their curtains could have sworn they heard the feared Commander Zixanax ask, "What exactly is a full house and why does it beat 2 pair?" Commander Velthor, second in command of the Zixanax fleet, stood in Hazel's living room looking thoroughly confused. His advanced tactical training hadn't covered what to do when your invasion was interrupted by snack foods and card games. He kept glancing between his weapon, currently being used as a coat rack, and the plate of cookies in his hands, as if trying to figure out where exactly the mission had gone sideways. "Now then," Hazel said, shuffling the cards with the skill of a Vegas dealer. "Before we start, I should mention my house rules. No telepathy, looking at you, Lieutenant, with the glowing third eye, and no using those fancy scanners to read through the cards, and Commander dear, your antennae twitch when you're bluffing." Commander Zixanax quickly tried to still his traitorous antennae. "This is most irregular," he muttered. "We came to conquer your world, not to learn human gambling rituals." "Well, you're here now," Hazel replied pragmatically, "and you might as well learn something useful while you're at it. Besides, your ships are blocking my satellite reception, so we can't watch Wheel of Fortune anyway." Velthor attempted his most intimidating stance, the one that had made 3 solar systems surrender on sight. Unfortunately, the effect was somewhat diminished by the fact that he was holding a wine spritzer. Hazel insisted it was better than their standard-issue conquest fuel and wearing one of Hazel's late husband's old poker visors. You do realize we have enough firepower in orbit to turn this planet into cosmic dust? He tried, though it came out more like a question than a threat. That's nice, dear, Hazel said, dealing the cards, but right now you need to focus on whether you want to call or fold. And do try the spinach dip. It's a new recipe. One of the junior officers, who had been cautiously sniffing the dip, took a tentative taste. His eyes widened, all four of them. By the Galactic Concordate, what is this green substance? No, that would be spinach mixed with some cream cheese and a few other things, Hazel explained, though I might have gone a bit heavy on the garlic. We must have this recipe for the fleet, the officer declared. Our nutrition cubes are significantly less satisfying. Commander Zixanax looked at his cards, then at his increasingly relaxed crew. I still don't understand. Where is the screaming, the panic, the desperate pleas for mercy? Oh, that all happened earlier downtown, Hazel assured him, but people probably got tired. It's been a long day, what with the whole invasion thing. Now are you going to bet or just sit there holding your cards like they're going to bite you? Velthor leaned over to his superior. Sir, I believe this might be some form of psychological warfare. They're disarming us with hospitality. That's ridiculous, Zixanax snorted, then immediately grabbed another cookie. Though these are remarkably effective weapons. The next hour was spent in a crash course on poker fundamentals, punctuated by various cultural misunderstandings. The aliens struggled with concepts like bluffing, but lying is punishable by exile in the Galactic Dominion, raising, so you're saying I can intimidate others with small plastic discs instead of plasma cannons, and the fact that a flush beats a straight. Your human card hierarchies are as confusing as your planetary classification system. Things got especially interesting when Ethel finally worked up the courage to come over, bringing her signature Jell-O salad. The alien spent 20 minutes just poking it, fascinated by how it wiggled. Most intriguing, one scientist in the group noted, scanning it with a device that probably cost more than the town's annual budget. It appears to exist in a state between solid and liquid. Perhaps this is the secret weapon we were warned about. No, that's just lime jello with pineapple chunks and cottage cheese, Hazel explained, though I suppose depending on who makes it, it could be considered a weapon. The real breakthrough came when Commander Zixanax discovered the concept of bluffing. His antennae might have given him away, but he was captivated by the idea of winning through cleverness rather than brute force. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, that in this game the smallest warrior can defeat the strongest through skillful deception? And good snacks, Hazel added. Never underestimate the power of proper refreshments during negotiations. Fascinating, Velthor murmured, attempting to arrange his cards the way Hazel had shown them. Though I must point out that according to Article 7, Section 9 of the Galactic Conquest Protocol, we're technically supposed to be harvesting your resources right now. Well, Hazel said, pushing the chip bowl closer to him, you're technically harvesting these Doritos, so I'd say you're still on mission. By 9 p.m., Hazel's living room had become an unlikely fusion of small-town poker night and interstellar cultural exchange. The aliens had arranged their battle armor in neat rows by the coat rack, revealing surprisingly comfortable-looking jumpsuits underneath. Commander Zixanax had even removed his intimidation helmet after it kept bumping into the ceiling fan. So in this variation called Texas Hold'em, Lieutenant Krax clarified, his universal translator struggling with the accent, the small blind is different from the big blind, but neither of them are actually blind. That's right, dear, Hazel confirmed, dealing the flop with practiced precision. Though the way you've been playing, you might be better off actually being blind. The commander chuckled, then quickly disguised it as a threatening growl when his subordinates looked his way. The effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was dunking an Oreo in milk, a technique that had taken him 15 minutes to master. Word had gotten around town that the alien invasion had been temporarily postponed in favor of poker night, and braver residents were starting to trickle in. Bob from the hardware store brought his famous spicy wings, which prompted an animated discussion about the concept of recreational oral pain among the alien scientists. You willingly consume capsaicin compounds for enjoyment, one researcher asked, his scales changing color as he reached for his third wing. Brilliant, psychological warfare through voluntary chemical burns. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, alien technology had been repurposed for rather domestic uses. A plasma converter meant for breaking down planetary defenses was being used to heat up cheese dip, while a quantum stabilizer kept the ice cream from melting. Hazel had to admit the alien's matter replicator made preparing snacks much easier, even if it did keep trying to add nutrients to her chocolate chip cookies. No, she scolded the machine. The whole point of cookies is that they're not healthy. Turn off the vitamin enhancement protocol. The invasion timeline was getting increasingly flexible. Every time Commander Zixanax's communication device buzzed with a message from the fleet, he'd wave it off with excuses that would have made any high school student proud. Delay in planetary subjugation due to unexpected atmospheric anomalies, he muttered into his communicator while carefully arranging his chips into neat stacks. Must conduct thorough investigation of local customs for tactical purposes. Tell them you're studying Earth's defensive capabilities, suggested Tom Henderson, who had showed up mainly to see what had happened to his cornfield. Technically, you are learning how we defend our pocket pairs. The competitive spirit was definitely heating up. Ethel, who normally played like she was afraid the cards would bite her, was now engaged in an intense hand against 3 alien warriors. Her tells were so non-existent that the aliens' advanced emotional scanning technology was giving error messages. I simply don't understand, grumbled Security Officer Zenth, folding yet another hand. How can a human's vital signs remain so steady while engaging in psychological combat? 30 years of teaching second grade, Ethel replied serenely, raking in her chips. You learn to keep a straight face. The game was interrupted briefly when one of the junior officers accidentally activated his universal weapon instead of his universal translator, turning Hazel's ficus into a small black hole. But Hazel just tisked and reminded everyone about proper weapon safety, much like she used to remind her grandkids about running with scissors. Besides, she added practically, I never liked that plant anyway. Harold bought it on clearance and it's been dropping leaves for 15 years. The real breakthrough in alien-human relations came when someone introduced the concept of poker snacks to the ship's artificial intelligence. The AI, designed to calculate the most efficient ways to conquer planets, became fascinated by the combination of probability mathematics and snack optimization. Processing new protocol, it announced through a floating hologram, calculating optimal ratio of sweet to savory refreshments for maximum strategic advantage. That's nice, dear, Hazel patted the hologram, but make sure you include my snickerdoodle recipe. Your commander seems quite fond of them. Zixanax tried to look dignified while brushing cookie crumbs from his uniform. They are being analyzed for tactical purposes only. Of course they are, Hazel agreed. Now, are you going to call my bet, or should I just take your chips now? The invasion fleet's schedule was now thoroughly derailed. The official mission log, usually filled with conquest strategies and subjugation tactics, now included entries like extended reconnaissance of Earth customs required, investigating unusual defensive strategy known as poker face, conducting thorough analysis of Earth sustenance called party mix, studying primitive but effective morale-boosting technique known as trash talk. By this point, even the most hardened warriors were getting into the spirit of the game. Lieutenant Cracks had fashioned a makeshift poker visor from part of his battle armor, and Security Officer Zenth was using his intimidation training to try, unsuccessfully, to bluff his way through hands. I think I'm beginning to understand this poker diplomacy, Commander Zixanax mused, watching Hazel expertly shuffle the deck. It's like conquering a solar system, but with less paperwork and better refreshments. By midnight, the game had reached a level of intensity that would have made professional poker players nervous. Commander Zixanax's antennae were twitching so badly, he'd had to tape them down with some of Hazel's medical tape, and Velthor was stress-eating his way through his 4th bag of chips, leaving fluorescent orange fingerprints on his combat uniform. The pot had grown to include not just poker chips, but also various alien artifacts, 3 planetary destruction codes, and Mrs. Henderson's secret recipe for apple pie. The tension was thick enough to cut with a quantum blade, which one of the aliens had actually tried to do before Hazel confiscated it, along with all other reality-altering weapons. All in, Hazel announced calmly, pushing her chips forward with the same steady hand she'd used to break up playground fights for 3 decades. Her face remained as unreadable as an ancient Egyptian tax return. The command ship's holographic communication system crackled to life for the 5th time in an hour, projecting the stern face of Grand Admiral Zixilnax, no relation to the commander. Apparently it was a common name in their star system. "Commander, why haven't you begun Phase 3 of the invasion? The entire 7th Fleet is waiting for your signal, and the propaganda department needs footage of human suffering for their quarterly report." Velthor jumped in, nearly knocking over his 4th wine spritzer. "Apologies, Grand Admiral. We're conducting crucial psychological warfare experiments, very time-sensitive. Can't be rushed." "Indeed," Commander Zixinax added, trying to hide his cards from the hologram's view. "We're learning devastating new tactical approaches. For instance, did you know humans have developed a technique called slow rolling that can completely demoralize an opponent?" In the background, Bob from the hardware store demonstrated said technique, taking an agonizingly long time to reveal a winning hand against Lieutenant Cracks, who made a sound like a deflating balloon. The Grand Admiral's multiple eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Is that music playing in the background?" "Psychological warfare soundtrack," Velthor blurted. "Studies show that something called Kenny Rogers has a devastating effect on tactical decision-making." Meanwhile, word had spread through the invasion fleet. Other ships were calling in, curiosity piqued by the strange reports coming from Earth. The kitchen had become an impromptu command center, with alien officers using Hazel's landline to explain poker rules to increasingly interested fleet commanders. "No, sir, it's not a violation of the Galactic Code to check raise. Well, yes, some might consider it rude, but no, you can't use a mind probe to see their cards. That's explicitly against house rules." Hazel's poker face had become legendary among the alien forces. Their most sophisticated emotional detection equipment couldn't get a reading on her. One scientist was convinced she must be some kind of advanced android until she started sharing embarrassing stories about her grandchildren. "Your bioscanners are useless against her," one alien warrior whispered in awe. "We've seen her bluff with nothing but a 7 high." The invasion's chain of command was rapidly dissolving into chaos. Other ships were requesting permission to land, citing the need to verify these unusual Earth defense strategies personally. The Grand Admiral was receiving reports of entire battle groups going off course because their commanders wanted to check out this poker thing. "I've got 3 more ships asking for coordinates to your grandmother's house," Velthor reported to Ethel, who was busy teaching a group of alien scientists the proper technique for dunking cookies in milk. "They're offering to bring snacks." Hazel just smiled serenely, arranging her chips with the same care she used to arrange her spice rack. "Well, they'll have to wait until next Friday. Tonight's game is full, and I don't care if they can fold space-time. House rules are house rules." The game reached its peak when Commander Zixinax, down to his last chips and what appeared to be the keys to a small moon, faced off against Hazel in what would later be known in alien history books as the hand that delayed the invasion. "Status report demanded from High Command," his communicator shrieked. "Tell them we're in final negotiations," he muttered, not taking his eyes off Hazel's unchanging expression. "Critical diplomatic phase. Can't be disturbed." More alien ships had appeared in orbit, their crews practically mutinying in their desire to join the game. The galaxy's most feared invasion force was being held at bay by an elderly woman's poker night. "Your human games are challenging indeed," Zixinax admitted, antennae still violently twitching despite the tape. "Our most advanced military academies never prepared us for anything like this." "That's nice, dear," Hazel replied, adjusting her bifocals. "Now, are you going to call my bet, or should I add that fancy space cannon of yours to my winnings?" As the first rays of dawn peeked over the Henderson's devastated cornfield, Commander Zixinax of the feared Galactic Dominion's 7th Conquest Fleet found himself in an unprecedented situation. He had lost 3 star cruisers, the access codes to a quantum arsenal, and his favorite intimidation helmet, all to an elderly human who kept calling him dear and making sure his drink was full. "I believe," he announced, looking at his final losing hand with a mixture of respect and bewilderment, "that we may need to reconsider our invasion protocols." The command ship's AI had given up on maintaining the invasion log and was now fully dedicated to analyzing poker strategies and calculating the perfect ratio of snacks to players. Its latest holographic projection showed a complex diagram linking cookie consumption to betting patterns. Conclusion: Earth demonstrates previously unknown strategic capabilities. Recommend immediate reclassification. Velthor, who had long since abandoned his warrior's dignity and was now wearing one of Harold's old bowling shirts, nodded sagely. The humans possess powers we never anticipated. Their ability to remain calm while bluffing defies all known psychological warfare tactics. "Oh, that's just years of practice," Hazel said, tidying up the snack bowls as the sun rose. "You should see our bridge club. Now those ladies can be really intimidating." The decision came somewhere between Ethel teaching a group of alien warriors the electric slide, which they performed with military precision, and Bob explaining the concept of winner-winner chicken dinner to increasingly fascinated alien anthropologists. "Earth must be protected," Commander Zixanax declared, trying to maintain his authoritative tone, despite wearing a kiss-the-cook apron he'd won in a side pot. "We shall designate it as a poker sanctuary." "Processing new classification," the AI announced. "Earth protected status. Reason critical source of cultural and tactical enrichment. Also, excellent snacks." The Grand Admiral, who had been watching the proceedings with increasing confusion, finally threw up all four hands in surrender. "Very well, but how do we explain this to the Supreme Council?" "Tell them we've discovered a more effective way of achieving galactic harmony," Velthor suggested, still clutching his favorite cookie recipe. "Through weekly cultural exchange programs." "You mean poker nights," the Admiral said flatly. "Exactly, think about it. We've learned more about human psychology in one night than all our advanced scouts discovered in years. Plus," he added, brushing cookie crumbs from his uniform, "the refreshments are vastly superior to standard invasion rations." As the alien fleet began to withdraw, except for those ships still waiting their turn to join future poker nights, Hazel started setting up her calendar. "Now remember," she told the commander, "Fridays are poker nights, but we also have bridge on Tuesdays, and every other Thursday is dedicated to learning new card games. No quantum weapons allowed, and everyone brings a snack to share." The invasion force had transformed into an interstellar social club. Regular poker nights were established, with alien ships carefully scheduled to avoid overcrowding Hazel's driveway. The Galactic Dominion's fearsome warriors now competed to bring the most impressive snacks, with one battlecruiser being entirely converted into a mobile baking station. "We'll need to establish some ground rules," Hazel mused as she wrote everything down in her little floral print calendar. "No using black holes to dispose of losing hands, time manipulation is strictly forbidden, and someone needs to help Tom Henderson fix his cornfield." Commander Zixanax, who had finally admitted defeat with surprising grace, made one last entry in the official mission log. "Earth conquest status postponed indefinitely, planet reclassified as strategic gaming reserve and culinary research center. Request immediate dispatch of additional snack replication units and playing card supplies. Also, someone please explain to High Command why we traded the flagship's main cannon for a cookie recipe. Note, it was worth it." As the aliens filed out of her house, promising to return next Friday, and asking one last time for her snickerdoodle recipe, Hazel turned to her cat, who had slept through the entire almost invasion. "Well, Mr. Whiskers," she said, gathering up the last of the cards, "I suppose this means we'll need to stock up on more chips, the regular kind and the poker kind." She paused thoughtfully. "And maybe we should get a bigger card table. I hear they're bringing some friends from the Andromeda Galaxy next time." In the years that followed, Earth became known throughout the galaxy not as a conquered planet, but as the home of the most legendary poker nights in the known universe. Alien diplomats requested assignments to Earth based on their poker skills rather than their military records, and Hazel's rules became the standard for intergalactic card games. And if anyone found it strange that humanity's first contact with alien life had ended in a regular game night rather than planetary conquest, well, they clearly hadn't tried Hazel's cookies. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, highlighting the departing alien ships. Commander Zixanax paused at his transport beam, holding his prized recipe card. "Same time next week?" he asked hopefully. Of course, dear, Hazel replied, but remember, it's your turn to bring the dip.